Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. Bismillah, salatu salam ala rasulillah. Today's lesson is going to be about silence. This is a really important lesson from the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And in fact, it's a prophetic quality and one of those qualities that cultivate mindfulness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As we have seen various stories of the prophets as they retreated from the noise, from distractions, from whatever was prevalent at the time in their culture. For Ibrahim alayhi salam, even his own dad or his own family, people that were worshiping the idols, for him to withdraw from that and the noise and the people to go out and seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he needed to be silent from the world and then turn himself and his heart towards Allah. Inni wajjahtu wajhiya lilladhi fatara as-samawati wal arda hanifa wa ma ana min al-mushrikeen. He turned his heart towards the one who created the heavens and the earth. And this retreat was common, and we see that also this retreat in the Prophet ﷺ as he retreated in the Ghari Hira, in the cave of Hira, where he actually contemplated and reflected, and he was silent, trying to be present and trying to have that stillness of heart to seek out Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you seek, you receive. When you seek, you receive. And this is something that sometimes in this world, without having to speak, without having to respond or react, we can just be silent and let Allah's wisdom and power and qudra shine through. Like at the time of the beautiful story of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, as he was sitting with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sitting with him, and this person came and he was abusing the Abu Bakr, and he was saying things to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. And as Abu Bakr then was silent and he was quiet, the person kept sitting, and the person, he didn't respond the first time. And then the person said it the second time. The person started saying all these things about Abu Bakr second time. And Abu Bakr still was quiet and he was silent. And the Prophet kept sitting with him. And the third time when the person said it again, Abu Bakr just responded back. And this is Abu Bakr, someone who was a beautiful role model. And it could have been because he wanted to clarify, or he wanted to, it could have been for other reasons. But as soon as he responded back, the Prophet ﷺ, he stood up and he left. As soon as Abu Bakr saw the Prophet ﷺ leaving, he got up and he started following him. And then he said, "O Prophet of Allah, you were sitting the first time, the second, third time when I started engaging with him, you got up and you left." The Prophet ﷺ said that the first two times, as you're quiet and you're silent, the angels were responding on your behalf. And as soon as you started responding, Shaitan was there. And wherever there is the devil, I cannot be there. And this is a beautiful lesson that sometimes we speak out of the whisper of Shaitan, or sometimes we speak because of our ego. And we do not have that quality of silence that brings that presence and mindfulness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Knowing that there is an unseen system that could be of help, that could be at our service, even when we have silence. And Ibrahim alayhi salam, the precursor to Hajj, precursor to the opening of Zamzam, precursor to this beautiful time when the foundation of the Kaaba would be laid and the Kaaba, the house of Allah, would be built, which will become the place we will turn our face towards millions of people until the day of judgment. All of that goes back to that small little story, but a very powerful story and very powerful qualities of the heart that qualified them for that blessing of Allah. How do we cultivate that quality? That Ibrahim alayhi salam was connected to Allah, and as he was just with signs, said that yes, as Hajars alayhi salam asked, this is a command of Allah, why are you living us in the middle of nowhere? And Ibrahim alayhi salam said, he did not speak. He was not speaking, and he just with signs. And of course, whatever he did was according to the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he just with sign pointed yes. And then at that time, if you think about it, you're leaving your kids, you're doing something that apparently doesn't make any sense. It's completely against human survival. You're not supposed to, in general sense, if you're not a prophet, as a general Muslim, we're not allowed to do that, right? We're not allowed to leave our family in the middle of somewhere where they have no food, no water, no shelter. They're not safe. It is not permissible. But a prophet, he is at a different level where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is directly communicating with him, and Allah is telling him to establish this house of God where Adam alayhi salam initially created this first house of Allah. And this is going to become that sacred place. He knows that. The Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam knows that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him that. And because of these qualities, he has cultivated these qualities in his family. So at that time, what could he have been said other than that it's a command of Allah, and that's enough. If Allah was enough for them, then who else did they need? And if you wanted to say anything else or give any other solution, how would that really help at the end of the day? At the end of the day, it all went back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that silence cultivated that connection with Allah. That it is not from me anymore. I am not the one that protects you anymore. It's not my spouse, it's not my family, it's not anything in this world, but ultimately it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is the one of the highest level of iman, where you are able to even go beyond the means to rely on Allah, and Allah becomes enough for you. So the quality of mindfulness, that the definition, that mindfulness is finding your calm among the storm. Like when during the storm you're able to find your calm, or when you are getting carried away, you're able to recalibrate your attention and reorient your attention to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this quality of mindfulness, that you find your focus even when you get all these distractions, even when you have all this noise. And Ibrahim alayhi salam, who else is a better example than him? Because he was being thrown into the fire, and as he was being thrown into the fire, that it is something that you're supposed to even leave your salah. Like if you're praying salah and the fire breaks out, you leave your salah to protect yourself and protect others. That Ibrahim alayhi salam, he has such deep sense of mindfulness of God that he was not even being distracted by the angel that came to his assistance. So cultivating that quality, and it comes with when you are calmness of heart, stillness of heart, that we will cultivate through silence. Some intentions for today's lesson will be that as we do the guided practice, how do we access our inner calm? How do we nurture reflection? How do we recalibrate our spiritual frequency? How do we cultivate the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? These are some intentions that we can make. And just going over a few beautiful narrations that Jabir ibn radiallahu anhu, one of the beautiful Sahaba of the Prophet said that the Prophet used to observe long periods of silence. And when it was asked one of the scholars, Abu Bakr al-Farisi, that what is this innermost, the silence of the innermost being, silencing our inner being mean? A lot of times when we are silent from the outside world, we are afraid to sit in silence because we are afraid of what might come up from inside, that we have all these maybe negative thoughts or emotions. And even silencing that to be present with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does that mean? And he mentioned that it is abandoning preoccupation with the past or the future, because our grief, tends to live off of the events that happened in the past, or our worries and anxieties tend to be attached to the things that might be happening in the future. So staying in the present with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Prophet told Abu Darda radiallahu anhu that you have good character and observe long periods of silence. And the Prophet even swore, he said, by the one in whose hand is the soul of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, no one can behave with deeds more beloved to Allah than these two. And these 10 days of Dhul Hijjah are the best days to do any good deeds. So if we can have good character these 10 days, and observe silence, especially when we get carried away, especially when we feel we get distracted, so that we can come back to our best character. We can come back to our most kind self. We can come back to our best self. Abu Darda radiallahu anhu said that silence is a form of wisdom, yet few people practice it. Few people practice it. Wahab bin Munabbih rahimahullah said that the doctors agreed that the head of medicine is diet, and the wise ones agreed that the head of wisdom is silence. And it is proven by neuroscience research now that just a few hours of silence, it helps us develop the parts of the brain that is related to long-term memory retention. And it takes the pressure off of the stress that all the noise puts in our brain, that our prefrontal cortex, that the rational part of the brain, it is pressured because of all these continuous, multitasking and noise and distraction. So sometimes sitting down and just taking a few deep breaths and cultivating that silence, cultivating the remembrance of Allah in your heart is so important, so healing spiritually, emotionally, and physiologically. And that when we spend time alone, it helps us reactivate the rational part of our brain. As Muslims, not just the mind, but also we can get back to our heart and remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from our heart, to cultivate spiritual and mindfulness, emotional regulation, and cultivate that spiritual insight or wisdom, inshallah. The lesson from Ibrahim alayhi salam's story, that sometimes we have to learn to be silent so that God's signs and God's wisdom can become apparent, inshallah. May Allah give us tawfiq to practice this beautiful quality of presence of heart, stillness of heart, presence of Allah through cultivating silence, inshallah. And we will get into a practice. And this is a practice that is really important. It's a foundational practice from Imam Ghazali, that how do we sit in seclusion, empty our heart of all concerns of the world, and strive to let no thought enter our mind, and just be silent and be present with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even quieting our inner voice. So let's practice this today, inshallah. This silence practice. We'll continue with a different lesson every day. And inshallah, we will end the session right after this practice today, the silence practice. Bismillah, salatu salam ala rasulillah. And if you are not able to sit in seclusion, sit away from all the noise, and you have noise around you, sometimes finding yourself and finding God in a crowd. You can be silent and be alone with God, and learning to be alone with God. And our scholars and our teachers told us and taught us that sometimes we have to learn to find God in the middle of the distractions, middle of a crowd. That maybe that you're sitting in a crowd and the entire crowd saying something else, you're being alone between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's also possible. And inshallah, that's also something we can cultivate. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. For this practice, I will turn off my video and I will ask you to listen to the audio, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Bismillah, salatu salam ala rasulillah. Ya Hayyu Ya Qayyum, bi rahmatika nastaghith. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. For this practice, I ask you to sit in a position that helps you bring this quality of sitting with some alertness, perhaps feeling and grounding yourself in the place that you're sitting on, supporting your lower back on the chair that you're sitting on, and perhaps lengthening your spine, just creating the sense of alertness in your upper body. Softening your shoulder, bringing the sense of ease in the body, lowering your gaze in humility and the presence of Allah. Perhaps softening your gaze to tune out or zone out of things around you to cultivate the presence of Allah in your heart, or closing your eyes to look inward in your heart. To gather our mind, we will practice the 3 breaths practice, just taking a deep breath in and trying to gather our kind and gentle attention on that process of breathing. Taking another deep breath in and just relaxing as you inhale and you exhale. Just relaxing your body, letting go of the stress as you exhale. Letting go of the tension from the neck, perhaps even squeezing the neck or the back or the body, and just then releasing them, releasing the tension and the stress from the body. As you take a 3rd deep breath together, bringing in the awareness and presence of Allah in your heart. Taking Allah in with inhale, Allah, and then letting all your anxieties and worries and stress go with Hu, Allah, Hu. Just letting it go. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Bismillah. For this practice, we are learning to be observing the prophetic silence and remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just for the next few moments, I invite you, not for too long, but just for a few moments as you're being led by this practice, remembering Allah's presence in your heart, and without having to move your tongue, without having to look anywhere, quieting an inner voice or inner thought, being open, gentle, and curious. Have a beginner's mind. Even if you practice this before, or if you have never practiced this before, just having this beginner's mind and saying, I'm going to seek Allah, I'm going to ask Allah to bless me in this practice. And only He can grant me the openings. Remembering the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam as he was being silent, and remembering all the silence that Hajjar alayhi salam had to practice, in the days and months to come in that middle of nowhere. That she was alone with her baby, and as the baby was sleeping, who was with her but Allah? Who else was in her presence but Allah? And those moments became the foundation of the opening of Zamzam that we have benefited until the day of judgment will benefit. The qualities of deeply connecting with Allah will open up the Zamzam for our hearts. May these silence, practice of silence and connecting with Allah, yearning out to Allah through our heart, be the openings of all the difficulties of our life and openings that we need in our life, and bring the blessing and barakah and remembrance of Allah. Allah says, فَاذْكُرُونِي أَذْكُرُكُمْ. If you remember Allah, Allah remembers us. And Allah listens to a mindful heart. So we're cultivating a mindful heart. Bringing our hands on our thighs, feeling our thighs with our hands, feeling the floor with our feet. Anytime your mind wanders, kindly bringing it back. And just for the next few moments, let's observe that minute of silence, cultivating the presence of Allah. Bismillah. Even when our mind wanders, bringing it back, perhaps gathering it on the breath. Just for a few moments, and then coming back to our heart and to the awareness of Allah. When we are silent and we are in solitude with Allah, do we feel this sense of fulfillment in our heart? Like when we are with a loved one, someone we feel will help us, will take care of us, will keep us safe and secure. Who else can keep us safe and secure? Who else is a better companion than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Not to be afraid to be alone with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because He's sufficient for us. And if any thoughts or emotions try to pass through, just letting them pass and coming back to the presence of God and saying that my thought, my emotion, you can pass through. I am now in the presence of my Lord. I'm cultivating this presence of Allah. How can I cultivate the heart of the Prophet when he was silent in the cave of Hira for days, where he used to observe long periods of silence? What did that look like? How can I emulate the heart of the Prophet? How can I emulate that sunnah of the prophetic heart? How did the silence of Ibrahim alayhi salam look like? How can I follow our grandfather, the grandfather of the Prophet, cultivate that prophetic heart? How did the silence of Hajar alayhi salam look like as Ibrahim alayhi salam left and she was alone with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Letting go of any fear, any difficult emotions, and knowing that Allah is enough for us. Having the most positive expectation of Allah in our heart. Before we close this practice, gathering our mind on the process of breathing. Regulating our breathing regulates our emotion. We can regulate our emotion. We can regulate our stress by a few deep breaths and then remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What a beautiful gift that He has given us. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Welcoming everyone back from this practice, inshallah. You can just stretch a little, move around. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we'll end with the closing dua. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the ability to be in silence, be in solitude with Allah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to cultivate our heart in this beautiful 10 days of Dhul Hijja. Qualities of beautiful character, qualities of presence in our worship, qualities of presence in our fasting. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to continue with this journey together. Inshallah, jazakumullah khair. I'll see you tomorrow. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum